Swoohoo YouTube, SwooCube here. Today we have another starter deck battle box deck tech video. Brief intro for those uninitiated. What I'm trying to do with these starter decks that I brew is make decks for other leaders that play well with the Luke and Vader and two-player starter product from FFG. So they are designed to be thematic, flavorful, at a similar power level and built with similar deck construction rules. Namely, they're built to have a high degree of variability, so there's a lot of one-offs in the decks. And really what I'm trying to do is create a battle box of decks where you can grab any two decks from the box and jam them together and have good games for some good, casual, constructed gameplay. This is deck tech number 7. I have a few more, probably 2 more from just Spark of the Rebellion. And then I already have decks in the works for 7 of the leaders that we've seen so far from Shadows of the Galaxy. So lots more deck tech content coming. Today we are talking about Director Krennic. And before I get into the deck tech, I'm just going to give a couple shout outs. So quickly, for those following with the series, you'll know that the last deck that I talked about was Leia Organa, and I was actually short about 15 cards in a deck that I had to borrow from my cube, much like what I'm going to have done for Director Krennic, which you will see as I start fanning out the cards. But I was missing a number of the cards because I built so many of these decks that my collection is starting to deplete, and so I reached out on Facebook to see if anyone had copies of the cards I was looking for, namely R2-D2 and C-3PO, along with some other cards. And a really cool guy named Ruben Sanchez on Facebook responded and sent me everything I needed for the deck on his own dime, and had some very encouraging and uplifting things to say about the channel, and he's been following along, and I think my content has been benefiting him in some way. So that was a great experience. Ruben, you're the man. Thank you for sending those cards, and I really appreciate it. And I hope that, my continued content is helpful, and glad to know you. He plays at, he asked me to shout out his LGS, Waterloo Games in Mechanicsville, Virginia. So if you're in the area, definitely go check out Waterloo Games. And I think the play group at that store also has a few guys that do a podcast called Ready a Resource. It's a pretty cool podcast. I've listened to a couple of the episodes. One of the guys who is on the podcast made top cut at the Richmond 4K that happened in May. So they're a pretty competent group of players, and they talk about new cards, and I've enjoyed their takes. So cool podcast. I'll put a link down in the description. And also one more shout out, another user from Discord named KodiakDuck also sent me copies of R2 and C-3PO. Very much appreciate that. Those cards will certainly find homes in decks that will be soon to come. So without further ado, Director Krennic. Krennic is a leader that I initially overlooked for the Battle Box project because I didn't really see the flavor at first glance that you could, the apparent. I'm looking to build fun thematic decks, and Krennic just didn't speak to me. He's obviously a very powerful leader. His static ability reads that every friendly damaged unit gets +1 strength, which is great. He deploys on 5. He's a 2/7. When he comes out, he has the same static ability and also grants Restore 2 on attack. So solid leader. He's been very, very successful in Premiere. And I was just completely uninspired to build a deck until my brother and play partner and basically entire play group whipped up a Krennic deck and wanted to test it out against my starter decks, and it worked really well, and we had a lot of fun with those games. The deck he built was a mono blue deck, so Vigilance, heavily based on Imperial cards and Villainous cards, obviously, but it actually was quite thematic, and so I've taken that deck, adapted it a little bit, tuned it a little bit to match power level, and that's the deck that I'm going to talk to you about today. I think it's actually pretty cool. And it has a major development that I have not employed with any of my other decks for the Battle Box yet. Namely, it uses Security Complex as the base. So it's a Director Krennic Security Complex double Vigilance deck using the rare base. This base allows you to use an action 1 time per game to put a shield token on a unit, but it comes at the cost of losing 5 health. I think in my testing so far, I think that losing the 5 health is actually kind of a handicap. You know, the shield action is really great, and if you use it well, it can certainly help your game. But the 5 health really hurts. So I've tried to balance the deck accordingly, and I think it's in a pretty good spot. Certainly with the card pool that we have right now, which with 1 color is pretty tough. But it certainly is workable, and this deck has a totally different flavor than any of the other decks I've built so far. It's maybe somewhat reminiscent to the Leia deck in that it's pretty focused at what it does, but is intentionally down-powered in some certain ways to kind of compensate for that. In this case, namely the base and some of the card choices, as you'll see. So, moving right into the deck. On the ground, we've got 2 surgical droids, 2 Viper probe droids, 3 snowtrooper lieutenants, 2 scout bike pursuers. Scout Pike is one of the key cards of the deck. Started as a 3 of, cut it back to 2 because it was just so good in this deck. And I felt like it was a little bit too good. And you'll see why but when I get to the end of this tech, right? 1 regional governor. When Shadows of the Galaxy comes out, regional governor will probably be replaced with Dr. Pershing. Dr. Pershing is going to be great in this deck. Regional governor is just fine. But doesn't quite fit as well as the governor or the doctor. Anyway, 3 drops. We got 3 cell block guards, 1 Del Mico, 3 death troopers. This is the real flavor high point of the deck, obviously with that Scarif art. Obviously the base is also set on Scarif, so it's kind of cool that we can have Krennic protecting the base that he was protecting in Rogue One, and doing so with lots of stormtroopers. Kind of fits, right? 1 General Veers. Most of the units in this deck are Imperial, so Veers is great. And basically I have 1 Veers in every Imperial deck that I build. So I have, let's see, there's a Vader deck, obviously the starter, my Thrawn deck, this deck, and I'm also brewing and tuning a Palpatine deck. All of them run Veers. 2 Lieutenant Childsons. So, or Childson, however you choose to pronounce that. So Childson is obviously great in this deck. There are quite a few mono black cards in the deck, so it's not just a guaranteed bomb. You have to really plan around it, but it is totally possible to drop Childson as a 5/5 with Sentinel, and then you can put a shield on it with Security Complex. It's one of the strongest things this deck can do. So that is kind of one of the main. He's certainly a bomb. 1 copy of Rugged Survivor, 1 Gideon Hask, and then at the top end, 2 ATSTs and 2 Cargo Juggernauts. So looking at the curve, obviously very heavily on the low end. Krennic is pretty much playing a low to the ground curve out mid-range deck. There's a little bit of healing in there to try and compensate for that low health total of the base. But you're really just trying to play your units skillfully, get them damaged a little bit, benefit from that attack buff, and trade well is kind of the game plan for Krennic. In the air, there are 3 TIE fighters. These ships obviously don't have enough health to benefit from his ability unless you upgrade them, which we'll get to shortly. 2 Inferno 4s, 2 System Patrol Crafts, and 2 TIE Advanced. So there's 9 space units. Most of them are all fairly cheap, nothing super powerful in space. Yeah, that's it for Director Krennic's units, doing that aggressive mid-range thing. Now, looking at the non-creatures. Upgrade-wise, this deck runs a full 3 copies of Resilient. Resilient is a key card in this deck because it almost always allows a unit to get an additional attack point. So really, Resilient reads +1/+3 in a Krennic deck once you get a hit in and can get some damage on the unit, and that's super powerful for the cost. Throwing a Resilient on a TIE fighter, most likely it's going to be attacking for 3 before it's done. It really helps you value trade. And you really need to work hard to get card advantage out of these. And they certainly allow you to do so with Krennic's ability, but that's where the skill comes in, right? 1 copy of Protector and 2 copies of Entrenched. This is a pretty strong suite of upgrades. Krennic's units are on the cheaper side, so you do need to put some work in to make them viable and able to, go toe-to-toe with some of the bigger bombs in the other decks. But that kind of feels on theme to me, right? Krennic is the middle manager of the Empire who's got all the resources at his disposal and needs to deploy them, wisely and skillfully. And that's really what your game plan is with the deck. Lastly, the event package: 1 confiscate, 2 repairs, 3 make and openings, 2 max firepowers, and a vanquish. Pretty straightforward. This deck definitely bumps into limited card pool. I wouldn't call it problems, but it's just a limited card pool. As the card pool grows, I will definitely be looking to branch out, add some other one-off effects for flavor and flair and variability. I already mentioned Dr. Persian going in. I think Incinerator Trooper will probably get a copy or 2. I think that'll be a great card in this deck and kind of fit with, obviously, the theme, and also we'll be able to benefit from Krennic's +1 power if you can upgrade it and get some more health points on it. Outside of that, there's not a whole lot I've seen in set 2. Maybe there's an upgrade or 2 that I can slide in instead of a Resilient or maybe the Protector. But overall, I'm really happy with this deck. It plays differently than everything else kind of in the suite of battle box decks that I've built so far. I really enjoy using the rare base. Games are very tense with Krennic. Those 25 health bases really are, it's like playing on hard mode a little bit. You get to basically always have a moment of peace in your hand for free. But that 5 health really, really does matter, especially in this format where decks aren't super tuned to take advantage of that ability as much as they are in, say, Premier. So that's it for Krennic. Thank you for watching. If you made it this long, please like and subscribe. And I will be back with more deck techs. Up next, we have Krennic's Nemesis, Cassian Andor with Jeddah City. So I've really enjoyed brewing starter decks with these rare bases. They add an interesting element and another dial for balancing. I think typically, for the most part, it's actually a step down in power level to include a rare base in these decks. So it enables me to build slightly more consistent, focused decks than what I typically would do. So, yeah, thanks. Take care. I'll be back for more later.